Oh, good afternoon, good afternoon. Everybody have a good lunch? Having a good time? Excellent, excellent. Well, we're going to change the tenor, the tone a little bit. We're going to talk about some different things. We had some fascinating conversations today. I hope you all enjoyed the morning panels as much as I did. There were some very interesting topics. But in all modesty, I'm going to talk about something infinitely more interesting today, because I'm going to talk about you. And I think you are, much more interesting than anything else we could talk about out there. And so that's going to be the subject of my talk. First, everyone's talking about these dour implications and what's going on in the market and how bad everything is. Now the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And, well, true. They asked me to come today and talk about mastering the moment. And they asked me this a year ago. Come talk about mastering the moment when the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Who knew Deborah could plan it this way? Has everyone been watching this over the last month? I mean, this is our market. Those of you who don't recognize it, this is the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, and the S&P, right? Does it look remarkably like this to you, right? And that's kind of where we are right now. We all started up here where W means woohoo, things are good in the economy, and X means get me to the exit, get off this ride. And everyone got off the ride, and then all of a sudden things recovered again, right? And then we bailed out, and now we're kind of at Z, and who knows where we are. And in all respect to Tom Cahill, this morning speaker, who was talking about the fact that history doesn't repeat itself, and I think that's true. History doesn't repeat itself, but I like to quote Mark Twain and say, well, history may not repeat itself, it sure does rhyme. Because, I think we've seen these sorts of things again and again and again. Most of us have seen this just as recently as the tech bubble bursting in 1987. We talked about the little hiccups we had there, and we talk about sort of all these things that tend to go on in the market, and that's just the way of things. The market tends to go up and down. All the issues, the challenges we face go up and down, and part of what I want to talk to you about today is just that. I am, by training, an industrial organizational psychologist and socio-cognitive economist. You can imagine my business card, right? What it means in plain English is I work with the CEOs and the masters of the universe and people in everywhere from the financial services firms to the Federal Reserve Bank and the pharmaceutical firms. I work with these CEOs and these leaders to help them sort of get a handle on reality and figure out what's going on and set up strategies and leadership strategies for their own organizations for how they can succeed through these sort of turbulent times. And there are some lessons to be learned there that I want to share with you. For a living, I kind of tinker in the brain of the boss, and that's what I do. But the first half of my life was spent in a little bit of a different pursuit. For the first about 2/3 of my life, I didn't go get a PhD till I was pretty old. For the first part of my life, I was at various times a paramedic, a police officer, a deep sea rescue diver, and finally team leader of a scout sniper recon team with the Special Forces. And that's where I started to get sort of an appreciation for the fact that, guess what? There is no such thing as predictability. There is no such thing as knowing what's going to happen next. The world is in turmoil, and we better learn how to deal better with it. Hi, paparazzi. So how do we do that? And what lessons can we extract from that from us? Well, I'm going to tell you a lot of what I tell the leaders that I consult to, that I coach to. And that is, I think we have this misconception of leadership. We tend to think that leaders are these people who set the course and decide what way we're going to go and make the troops follow them. And we have this symbol of leadership of people who we will all come and rally behind, and they know where they're going. And that tends not to be true. The greatest leaders really have no idea where they're going. I hate to give away the secret. They know that wherever they decide to go, the world is going to change anyway. It turns out you don't have to be dietetical, you don't have to be a god to be a leader. The greatest leaders in history are just people. They're people who decide on a course of direction, sure, but they get people to be able to follow them. That's all a leader is. To be a leader, you don't have to be somebody who knows it all. Of course, you also can't be someone who's oblivious to what anyone says either. I know, it's too far, right? I know. You told me don't show that slide. But leadership, I think, even during our lifetimes, has started to change as it started to evolve. And I haven't worked with as many people in your industry as I'd like, but I see you as leaders in very different ways. You're leaders not only of your own organizations, but you're leaders of us as a world, as a community. You help to shape and change our thinking. And so the challenges you face, I think, are very similar to the same challenges my corporate clients face. And those challenges have become greater and greater over the last couple of years. We talked about sort of those market exacerbations and those things that are going on in the environment. When I talk about change, I like to talk about them in a context we can kind of get our head around. And I think about sort of the delta forces of change. I think of how much the world has changed during our lifetime. By the way, everyone saw me. I came here in a blazer, right? So if my daughter asks, good. You can say I showed up in a coat. Okay, good. My daughter is like a lieutenant colonel in the fashion police. Think about the delta forces of change, how things have changed. Think about, just in the time all of us have entered the workforce. Most of you, like me, entered the workforce in the, well, let's see, in the room here we have in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, right? Some of you in the 90s. I don't want to talk to you. But think about how much has changed in that short amount of time. Think about the demographic composition of the workforces we leave, and even the clientele we serve, and how much that's changed. Do you think you'd have seen a composition of leaders, thought leaders, industry leaders, like the one we have here today 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even in this industry? How many women architects were there at the highest ranks 30 years ago? Anyone have any estimation or guess? Or people of different nationalities or people of different ethnicities? We tend to see a big shift, a big difference here. I won't even talk about the changing economic climate that we're living in right now, and if nothing else, we'll be remembered by this constant fluctuations. Think also about the legal and regulatory changes that you all have to contend with every day. What was the form we have to deal with? I don't even want to remember the acronym anymore. But we all have all these new hoops and layers that we have to jump through. The technological changes, please don't get me started. When I started teaching on this subject at the City University of New York, and this is only going back about, I guess, 10, 12 years ago, I would ask my class, how many of you have an email address, right? How many of you have this thing called a cellular telephone? Do you have one of these yet? No. Think about how much that's changed in the short time we've been in the world of work. The biggest change, though, I think we're seeing is in this, in attitudes and values. The attitudes and values not only of our customers, but of the people within our own organizations. Think about how much that's changed. You want a great insight on how much this has changed? Technology, attitudes, values, these sorts of things? I'm at home the other day, I'm doing some work on my laptop, and I'm too lazy to walk all the way into the den, so I'm sitting there on the living room couch, and I'm working on the wireless laptop. Ain't I cool, right? And as I'm working, the phone rings. Well, I forgot to bring the cordless phone, so now I do have to put down the laptop, I have to get up, I have to walk to the den, I walk in, I pick up the phone. You know what it is? It's my son. He's upstairs on his cell phone and wants to know what's for dinner. Things have changed, right? It's changed. We wouldn't have had those kind of things. When you and I entered the world of work and your boss would tell you to jump, what was the only acceptable answer? Different now, right? The greatest symbol I've found of change, though, is this. Raise your hand if you know what this is, if you're under 30. Only if you're under 30, and I'm going to check. I'm going to check IDs. All right, over 30s, look around the room, people. None of them are raising their hands. Over 30, yeah, raise your hand if you know what this is. All right, exactly, yeah. We know what this is. You see it? Yeah. I was in Seattle, Washington a couple of months ago. I'm walking down the street and I see a record store. Those of you under 30, that's how we used to listen. It was vinyl and music emanated from it, right? And I find on the counter they have a box of these things. Over 30s, what is this? What are these? That's right, they're for 45s. They're the inserts we used to put in the 45s, which, by the way, why did we have to use these things? Do you remember? 45 PM records only had a big... Why didn't they make the hole smaller? I don't know. You're the designers and architects, you figure it out. But the fact is, we needed these, right? We had to have these. But we don't have these anymore, do we? I'll tell you a funny story. I forgot I had this in my pocket. I'm sitting on the couch with my wife and my son's there, and I was digging around my pocket for some coins. And I forgot I had it. I said to my wife, hey, look what I found when I was in Seattle last week. She looked at it and she says, oh, son of a gun, I haven't seen one of those in years. My son says, well, what's that? We said, oh, my wife said, oh, we used to put those in our 45s. He said, you had guns? So, no, we didn't have guns. That was music. That's how we listened to music, right? How many of you remember 45s? You had 45s? That's how you listened to it? That's right. 45s changed, though, right? We got rid of vinyl. We got rid of records. Who guessed first? You guessed first. You get to keep up. There you go. We changed. We stopped listening to music. Don't worry, I have more. We stopped listening to music that way. We stopped listening to records. After records, what came next? What was the next evolution after music, after records? 8 tracks, that's right. Do you remember in your 68 Camaro? Yeah, you put it in, you could listen, right? And 8-track tapes, great technology. Happy days, click, 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 right? Terrible technology. After 8 tracks, what was the next thing we had? Cassette tapes, that's right. We had cassette tapes, and then they could get stuck in your dash too, right, with the 8-track, right? And then we changed the way we listened to cassette tapes. What was the next evolution in sound? How we listened to cassette tapes, we had, what were they called? Walkmans, that's right. We had Walkman. It was a whole different thing of music. Then, after cassettes, after the Walkman, we had another revolution in music. What was it? How do we listen to music then? CDs, that's right. I can still remember when CDs first came out. I'm down in Times Square, crazy 80s out there, and he's got all the CDs, and he goes, you can light them on fire, and they still play. And I'm thinking, why would you want to do that? But cool. And so I bought some of them, right? And for a lot of us in the audience, we still listen to CDs, don't we? Right? But is that how kids listen to music today? No. How do kids listen to music? That's right, iPods. Music is digital. I'm talking about something as fundamental as music. During our lifetime, think about how much this has evolved, how much this has changed. In fact, when I first started talking about this, I was going to do this presentation. I told my assistant, Colette, I said, Colette, I'm going to talk about this. I need a theme. I should talk about how the times they are a-changing, right? So why don't you go out and get me a picture of Bob Dylan? And you know what she said? Who's Bob Dylan? Right. So I fired her. And I did. I said to her, Colette, you know what? You're fired. She goes, ha, 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 very funny. Get in there and work on your presentation. I'm like, okay. I went back in, and I found my own picture of Bob Dylan, too, right? Because we manage people differently. People respond differently. They react differently. Not just our clients, but the people in our organization. So how do you manage people in this crazy environment? How do you manage yourself in this crazy environment? If the theme of what I'm supposed to talk to you about today is mastering the moment, how do you do that? Well, the great advice, I think, is to reach back into history. And it's to reach back, in fact, to the Oracle at Delphi. The Oracle at Delphi, most of you are familiar with it, gave great advice to some, marginal advice to others. But the one piece of advice it gave to all, which I think is universal, was on the lintel as you would enter through the archway, it said this. Most of you were up on your ancient Greek, right? Those of you who aren't, I took the liberty of translating. It comes to this. Know thyself. If you don't know who you are and what you're about, then how can you possibly hope or expect to lead others? What are you about? Who are you about? This is the first question I ask everyone that I work with, everyone that I coach, everyone that I consult to. Because I find that, regrettably, most people will spend more time planning their next vacation than they do examining their own lives. Think to yourself, when's the last time you took time, you created space in your life to really examine what your values are, what matters to you, what you think is important? I'm going to ask you to do that very, very briefly right now. I have a list of potential values for you to look at. I'd like you to read through this list very quickly. Don't pause, don't give yourself a break. But as you do, I'd like you to take 2 or 3 or 4 of them for yourself. If you want to add one to the list that isn't up there, that's fine. But pick 2 or 3. The only caveat I have is, make sure that they're true values for you. Don't worry about what's socially acceptable, about what the world thinks you should have. These are important to you. The second caveat is now, today, at this point in your life. They may not have been the same values when you were 18. They may not be when you're 81. But today, they are core values to you. They're very important to you. Take just a second, write 2 or 3 of them down. You got them? If anyone picked one in the red, you got to stay after and see me because you've got issues. But, well, hopefully nobody picked them. But why is this important? And why is it that I focus on this with leaders? Because I make the point to them that if you're leading a life that is not consonant with these values, then you're never going to be happy. You're never going to be truly successful in the truest sense of the word. It turns out that most of these are agnostic. It doesn't matter what your values are. What matters is that you live a life that's concordant with them. And I would ask you to challenge yourself. Do you? Do all of you? When you've identified these 2 or 3 items that you have on your sheet right now, look down on them and ask yourself, over the last week, the last month, the last year, have I lived a life that is consistent with these values? You want the greatest secret I can tell you today? If you want to stay off the couch of my clinical colleagues, check yourself on a regular basis and see that you're doing just that. That you're living a life that's consistent with what those values are, what you truly believe in. Do you believe in learning? Do you believe in security, in creativity, in affection? If you do, then check to see that you're living a life that's concordant with those things. And not just in your personal life, but in every aspect of your life. When I think of these values, I think of the Matryoshka dolls. I studied at the University of Moscow, and when you're in Russia, anyone who's been to Russia knows, anywhere you go in the city, you find Matryoshka dolls. They're from the size of a grain of sand up to ones that are a sarcophagus that I could get inside. But what I love about them is they're always intricately carved and fitted so that one nests perfectly into the other, into the other, into the other. That's how I think of values. The values that we're identifying now, and there's a more elaborate process, I'd be happy to email you and take you all through, anyone who's interested in how you get to a process of examining your true values. It wouldn't fit into my 20-minute slot, though. But how do you identify those values? Those become your essential values, your core values, these sort of this right here. But it's important that in your work, those fit. In your family, in your relationships, in any part of your life, these things have to nest and fit into one another. It's an exercise I encourage all my clients to repeat, not only with their business partners, but with their personal partners, with the people they spend their life with, to make sure these things fit one into another. And it's not just enough to identify these values. I take a page in this regard from Tibetan medicine. Everyone can read the Tibetan, right? Okay. Tibetan medicine is all about balance. And what we talk about in Tibetan medicine is the fact that everything should be in a state of health, in a state of evenness, that everything should be in balance. Because even once you've identified these values, is it possible to have a value that's lived inappropriately? I don't know. What if you pick one like family? Let's pick family as a particular value. Could you see where you're living a life that even though you profess family to be important, there's a deficit there, and you're not fulfilling that part of your life. You're not fulfilling that value. You're saying, yes, family is all that matters to me, and yet I'm never home, I never spend time with my kids. How much time does the average father in the United States spend with his children, small children under age 12? Any guesses? How about 3.5 minutes a day? 3.5 minutes a day. Now, if you say to yourself that family is a core value, and that's what's happening in your life, can you see how there might be some rift there? Can a value be in a state of hyperactivity? Well, what about a value like family? I'll tell you, I took my daughter and I put her in college about 2 years ago. And when we put her in college, we moved her into the dorms, and as we were carrying up the boxes, her brother and I, a bunch of other boys came over from the fraternity, and they were all helping carry up boxes. And I told my daughter, oh, that's so nice of them, that they came all the way across campus to be able to help you with that. She said, across campus? They live right there. She points across the hall to the other room. And I said, interestingly enough, your brother and I live here. We're moving in. She pointed out to me that even a value like family could be in a state of hyperactivity. What about in a state of dysfunction, potentially? Well, you know, Manson. Can you have dysfunctional families? Can you have even that value and not have it be functional? I'd offer it's entirely possible. Just coming up with these values, the moral of the story is not enough. A lot of my corporate clients will take the time to do these things, to explore what are our values and what do we believe in as a company. And some of them will even codify them. They'll put them into, you know, these beautiful successory type posters. This is one of my favorites. This comes out of a crystal paperweight. And the paperweight is on the desk of every executive in the organization when they made this. And here's the first one. It said, respect. We treat others as we would like to be treated ourselves. We do not tolerate abusive or disrespectful treatment. Ruthlessness, callousness, and arrogance don't belong here. Does an organizational psychologist's heart good, doesn't it? Integrity they had, and excellence. And this one was communication, and you may not be able to see the top of the paperweight, but that's what was on top of it. This sits on my desk as sort of a reminder. I did not consult to Enron. I didn't work with their organization, but the point here is, if these things are the things you truly believe in, just saying them isn't enough. They have to be part of your action. And quite often, even in our own lives, we find they are not. I'm going to do a little experiment with you. I'm going to ask you to fill in the blanks. Don't say them out loud. Don't commit them in writing. Don't tell anybody. But I'd like you to fill out these blanks for yourself. In the past week, think of any person you know, work with, are related to, have a relationship with. That person made me so. Fill in the rest of the blank. Okay? Take just a second. Made me. Made me. I always think that's a curious phrase when I talk about these things. Can anyone or anything make us? I don't know. I don't know. For the answer to that question, I tend to turn to one of the great philosophers of modern time, possibly of all time. It's someone whose work you're probably intimately familiar with. I'm talking, of course, about Lucy. Lucy, I think, framed the argument for us the best. I'm going to ask you to listen to this for just a second.
It's about time you got here. I've been trying to find Mr. Burns' file.
Oh, George Burns. How do you do? Oh, you've been a favorite of mine for years.
Thank you.
Oh, I used to watch you all the time on radio.
You watch me on radio?
I mean, I used to listen to you on television.
Listen to me on television.
Yeah, that was the year my picture tube went out.
Should have gone back to watching me on radio.
Oh, you say the funniest thing.
Mrs. Carmichael! I've been trying to find Mr. Burns' file. It is not under the B's.
Oh, I must have put it under the X's.
Why would you put the B file under the X's?
Well, that poor little file never has anything in it. Here.
Well, where is it?
Well, no, I don't know. Wait a minute. I bet I know what I did. You see, Mr. Burns, I always have trouble remembering names, so I took a course in word association. Now, Burns reminds me of fire.
So you filed it under the F's?
No, fire reminds me of stove.
So you put my file under the S's?
No, stove reminds me of pot roast.
It's your turn. You filed it under the P's?
No, pot roast reminds me of noodles.
Mrs. Carmichael, you're making me angry. You're making me hungry.
And noodles reminds me of my mother.
Your turn. Noodles remind you of your mother?
Yeah, she made the best noodles, and I bet that's where I put your file.
Under noodles.
No, under gravy.
Mrs. Carmichael, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. I know what I'm going to do with her. Start a whole new career.
All right. How many of you worked with a Lucy, right? When I was at the Gallup organization, I was their research director, and I got a big promotion, and they gave me 50 people who worked for me, and they said, oh, and now you get a personal assistant. You know who they gave me? Lucy. What they didn't realize was I loved her. We got along great. We had a great time. But when you're watching this video, if you were going to fill out the blanks here, what would you say on this one? Never mind what we said on the previous. Lucy made me so. How would you answer that? Well, it depends, doesn't it? Depends on if you're Mr. Burns or if you're Mr. Drysdale, her boss. What would you say? What if you were Mr. Drysdale? What would you say? Angry, frustrated, irritated, right? What if you were George Burns? Hungry, exactly. Exactly, made me so hungry. Here's the question for you, though. What changed? Did Lucy's behavior change between the first and the second? No, nothing changed. The stimulus remains the same. It's our perception of it. There's an axiom in psychology. Perception is more important than reality. Reality is subjective, it turns out. Perception is the only thing that's real. It's not what happens in the world. It's what we do with what happens in the world. How many of you, when you filled out your own blanks, picked one of the red words? Even though you tell me those aren't the things that truly matter to you, that are truly your values. If that's the case, why do we allow that to happen? I'll ask you a question that I ask all my students at the university, and it's simply this. Give me a list of the things you think you can't control in your life. And I have students who live in New York, so it's an easy list, right? What's the list? What are some of the things you would think they would tell me you can't control in your life? Disease, weather, traffic, accidents, the subway, right? Good. Now give me a list of all the things you can control. You know what? Actually, nothing else. It turns out I've been doing this for a long time, and there's only one thing. You. That's it. Turns out that's the only single thing you can control. So knowing that's true, the question I have for you is, if the only thing you can truly control is yourself, are you willing to relinquish that control? Control of yourself, of your mind, to circumstances, to other people, to me? Because if you are, look closely into the desk right here as you reach for your wallet. But this is in large part what we do. We let other people hijack our mind, hijack our brain. I'm not saying there aren't real problems out there. There aren't real issues. But simply running around willy-nilly is not the way to solve them. Understanding that we get to meter our reaction to them and what we do with them. This big financial roller coaster that we saw over the last couple of weeks, was this a good thing or a bad thing? Let me ask you. And I don't ask you naively. I honestly don't know. I don't know. I can tell you personally it was a wonderful thing. I profited immensely. Thank you very much. It works out well for some people. It works out poorly for others. It depends on what you do with it. The circumstances simply occur. Are there bad things that occur? Certainly. But it's what we do with them. One of the most profound pieces of wisdom I heard in this regard is from a gentleman by the name of Viktor Frankl. Many of you are probably familiar with his seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl was a concentration camp survivor. He survived Auschwitz, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, 5 major concentration camps. His entire family, his friends, everyone he knew, everyone he loved, was killed during his time in the camp. Frankl was also one of the great luminaries, one of the great minds in psychology. During the course of his internment, during the course of his time in the camp, he radically changed the way he thought about psychology and about human thinking, human ability, humans in general. He best summed up his philosophies, I think, in this statement. It was this: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. The simple fact of the matter is the world is going to be crazy, but you're leaders. The world is going to look to you to understand what to do in light of that craziness. Not just the people who work for you, but the communities that rely on you, on your judgment, on your perspective. They're going to learn from you. My best advice to you is the same advice I give all the CEOs I coach, all the people I work with. Give up trying to control everything. Stop playing golf, learn to surf. Go with the flow. That's all I have for you, and I'm at my 20 minutes. Thank you.